Good afternoon. Thank you very, very much for coming. This is an event we've looked forward to here at the Kennedy School now for some time. And I think that in just a few moments you'll have ample reason to find out why. This has been such an anticipated day. This is an event that is co-sponsored by three organizations here. The HKS National Security Committee, what is that called? The Armed Forces Committee, is that what that's called? Okay, well, that's made up, the veterans make that up, and then the National Security Fellows, and then our own Center for Public Leadership. And I guess we provided the pizza. Did we do that, Donna? And also we were honored that our speaker was able to come. I had the pleasure, my wife and I, this summer, of going with our speaker and his new bride to the Boston Red Sox game where he was honored. It was Veteran of the Month. Was it Veteran of the Month? And they asked him to come over and stand up on top of the Red Sox dugout in between innings. And he got this thunderous applause. The whole stadium stood, it was a sold-out game. And I think it demonstrates the sentiments of this country towards so many young heroes who've come back from serving the country in military uniform and are increasingly providing role models here in the United States and overseas for citizen leadership and trying to get others engaged in leadership. Eric Greitens grew up in Missouri. He went to Duke, where I'm proud to see the Duke tie that he has on today, a Blue Devil looking tie. He was a philosophy major in college. He won both a Rhodes Scholarship and it was a Marshall? Truman, and a Truman. It's a rare individual who wins both of those. Went off to Oxford, where he did two things. It's an interesting question which one was more notable. He got a PhD in international development, and he also won a number of boxing championships because he'd become an amateur boxer while he was at Duke, found it was a little cushy there, and had went off to these gyms in Durham where I grew up and worked out with these black boxers and who taught him how to box. But he went off to Oxford and did that, and he became a humanitarian. Working in far-flung places in the world like Rwanda and other places like that. And one might think that would have put him firmly on a path to be engaged in, as an academic perhaps, who might be here at the Carr Center, working on human rights. But instead he decided to make a different life choice. In 2003 he signed up for the Navy SEALs. And those of you who know anything about the SEALs know just how tough a regime that is. We've all learned more about that with the demise of bin Laden. And while there, he had 4 deployments. He won a number of awards for his military service, including a Purple Heart. But as I understand this, as I remember the story, I may have some aspects of this wrong. While he was wounded, it was his men in uniform who were more grievously wounded. He came back and saw how their lives had been changed so dramatically by their disablement, and so many of them were demoralized because they had joined the service with a sense that they were on a mission to serve the country, and that mission had been brought to a crashing end by what had happened to them in the field. And Eric then set out to see if he couldn't provide new hope for them and get them back on their feet. And he started an organization called The Mission Continues. And the whole notion behind The Mission Continues is, okay guys, you've been disabled in one way, but you're still able in other ways. It's really important for us to help you get back on your feet, find jobs where you can continue to serve your country. And he can tell more about that story. But the first call I got about Eric came from the president of the Goldman Sachs Foundation some months ago and said, I'd like to introduce you. You need to know about Eric Greitens. I said, I've heard about him. I know about him already, but tell me more. And she said, we have fallen in love with him at the Goldman Sachs Foundation. And the foundation has provided him $6 million for his startup. And he's now got, I think, 3 more years to spend out and to build this organization and to partner with other veterans organizations on behalf of veterans around the country. It's a stirring tale. It's a personal story as well as a story about the idealism of the country. And he captured it best, and I hope that you will have a chance. You know, we don't, under the rules, we don't sell books at Harvard. It's sort of a difficult thing to do, but we can urge you to go and get this book. But his book called The Heart and the Fist is, I think, and its subtitle is The Education of a Humanitarian, the Making of a Navy SEAL. And I just would urge you to read this. He sent it to me in a manuscript form, and I wrote among the endorsements. If you worry that America is no longer a home of heroes, come read this riveting tale of a young man's adventures as a boxer, a thinker, a warrior, and ultimately a humanitarian. He writes admiringly of the Greek notion of phronesis, practical wisdom. Quote, the ability to figure out what to do while at the same time knowing what is worth doing. Mr. Greitens has plenty of phronesis. So I want to turn this over, but just before I do that, you have to meet his bride. Could you please stand just for a moment? Mary, now how many, 8 weeks is it now? 8 weeks? 10 weeks?
Maybe 10. Yeah.
10 weeks. 10 weeks. And you know where they met? They met at the Institute of Politics. Eric was here on a panel, and she was studying as a PhD student in the government department, and came just almost randomly. A friend asked her if she'd come, and she wasn't quite sure, and then her day opened up, and she said, I think I'll come. And the rest is history. And they went off and had a wonderful honeymoon in Italy. They're now back living in St. Louis. One day we'd like to see them living in Cambridge again. You've got to finish that. She's finished all her courses now. She's got to get her thesis done. But I'm telling you, I think that she tells, that the fact that they're married tells you everything you need to know about him. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to you all. We've got our student leaders here to do this. Thank you very much. Eric, thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thank you, David.
So, welcome. My name, I don't know if this thing's too loud here. My name is Dan Futrell. I am a second-year public policy student here. I am a 5-year Army veteran and left immediately after the Army to come here to school. Very excited to be here, co-moderating with Renee.
How you guys doing? My name is Renee Ramsey. I'm also a student here at the Kennedy School in the Master's Public Policy program. I'm an Army veteran. I'm 8 years in, but I still am on active duty. I'll be traveling to West Point upon completion of my studies to teach international relations in the social sciences department.
So, Eric, I'd like to start you off. You have, right now, as leading the mission continues, you have dedicated yourself to service, and particularly you've chosen, how do we get veterans coming home to continue their life of service in the country. Yeah. You didn't start out there. That has been a life journey, and I'm curious if you could share kind of briefly kind of the big points, the big experiences that you had that got you to where you are now.
Sure. Yeah, just I was very fortunate actually when I was young to have a number of really important mentors who pushed me. And one of those was a guy when I was 16 years old. His name was Bruce Carl. Bruce Carl ran this thing in St. Louis called the Youth Leadership St. Louis program. And Bruce said to me one day, he said, Eric, I want you to come down and we're going to do some service work in a homeless shelter in downtown St. Louis. And I had done different community service projects before, and but I said, yeah, sure, I'll be happy to go down with you, Bruce. And then Bruce said to me, and we're going to spend the night in the homeless shelter. And as a 16-year-old kid, that was a little bit, fear-inducing to have to actually think about spending a night in a homeless shelter. What Bruce did for me, though, and he did for all of the students who were in his program, was that he always addressed us with real respect. We were 16 years old, we were teenagers, but what Bruce said to each one of us was, he said, I want you to come down and I want you to spend the night in the homeless shelter because I want you to understand how all of your neighbors are living. And he said, and I want you to understand that because you can do something about it. And as a 16-year-old kid, you don't feel like you can actually do something about homelessness. But Bruce said to us, he said, you can actually do something about this. And he didn't say, you have to wait until you're 26 or 36 or 46 to do this. He said, you can do this when you're 16 years old. And I was really fortunate to have mentors like that when I was young who pushed me and taught me different ways that I could connect to different people and different ways that I could be of service. And then I was very fortunate when I went to Duke. I had some great professors who pushed me, who had me do my first international humanitarian work. Took me when I was 20 years old to live in a refugee camp with Bosnian refugees who were survivors of the ethnic cleansing. I was fortunate as a Navy SEAL again to have some great instructors who really pushed me and pushed you past your physical, mental, and emotional limits. And so I think I've been fortunate in all of those cases to have people who really helped to push me in my own journey and push me in a very particular way, and to push me to see how I could actually be of service to others. And it's a way that a lot of times we're not pushed, right? I mean, we might be pushed academically, we might be pushed physically, but I was really fortunate to have a lot of people who pushed me to see how I could be of service to others. And as David mentioned, it was after the experience in Iraq when our team was hit by the suicide truck bomb, when I came home and I visited with my friends and I visited with wounded Marines at Bethesda Naval Hospital, that led me to the work that we do today with The Mission Continues.
It's kind of a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your book, when you first arrived at Duke as an undergraduate,
Yes.
You were perhaps a little disillusioned
Yes.
with the education, the formal education of public policy. So was there any event or was a series of things that kind of led you to embrace the formal study and then continue your humanitarian work?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, it was interesting actually, if anybody who's read the book, I talk about my disillusionment when in my first class of the first day of my freshman year, when I was in a public policy studies class and the professor started writing a decision matrix up on the board, and he was putting little multiplication pieces on there, and I just, I was so excited about everything that we were going to learn at college and all of the wisdom that was going to be handed down to us. And then when I saw the multiplication table, my heart just sank, and I just thought, is this what we're going to take? And so I think that part of what happened, and the story is that recently the professor who taught that class wrote to me. Right? And he actually said to me, he said, I read this and I was, I'm sorry that I didn't engage you in the right way. and I said, actually, I mean, I was 18 years old and I had all of these grand ideas about what was going to happen. I probably would have been disillusioned with anything that I would have seen on that first day. But I think that for me, what happened at Duke that was really important for me was, first, I had some really great mentors. And so very early in my freshman year, I started to think about what I wanted to study. And I actually went to a couple of mentors and I asked them, who are all of the people who I should take a class with while I'm at Duke? Right? Regardless of subject area, like who do you need to take a class with? And somebody said, like, you got to take a class on Milton with Reynolds Price, and you got to take a class on Renaissance history with Ron Witt, and you got to take a class on religion and ethics with Tom McCullough. And they just, they were able to put me and point me to some really incredible individual professors regardless of subject area. So I think part of it was having those good mentors who connected me to some professors who kind of helped to guide me. Then I think the other thing that helped to round out my education was also what I was doing outside of the classroom. I was having these wonderful experiences in the classroom, and then I would leave Duke every afternoon and I would drive down to the inner city in Durham, North Carolina, and I'd go to this boxing gym in the city. And it was really fun to leave the Duke philosophy classroom where somebody would be teaching about Aristotle, right? And Aristotle says that you know what the good thing is by seeing what the good man does. And then I would drive down a couple of miles into the city and I'd be with my boxing coach and I'd be asking him all these questions about how to throw a jab and how to throw a hook and how to throw an uppercut. And he'd always say to me he'd say, watch Derek. He'd say, watch your training partner. Say, watch Derek. And I'd say, yeah, but how do I, and I had all these questions, and all he would say to me all the time, he said, watch Derek. He said, do as he does. And so I started to see after a while that what I was actually learning in the classroom was actually reflected here in this very different environment in the boxing gym. And being able to have all of that come together combined with the service work overseas really, I think, provided a really rich education.
So basically what you're saying is, in order to serve, we need to go get our face beat in, right?
You have to avoid that, actually. You got to find the right teacher. Yes, yes.
You said something that was I thought was interesting as we were talking ahead of this, and you kind of made a connection. You called it success to, what do you call it?
Significance.
Success to significance, and that was, that's something I've been kind of thinking about as I was thinking about this discussion, and the way that you kind of framed it, and the way that I was kind of you were kind of talking about. All right, there are so many very talented people who are at a point in their lives where they have been successful. How do you kind of convert that into making a real difference, into significance? And as I've been, I was thinking about it ahead of time and thinking about, kind of there's the, in the military they kind of refer to it as a tactical level versus a strategic level. Here, I mean, we would just say, on the ground, getting your hands dirty versus making policy. And as I'm trying to imagine these two worlds coming together. That's where you are. You have been, you have served in the White House, and you've been in Rwanda, and you've served in Afghanistan. How do you, there is, and I know that you've seen some of this, where a well-intentioned policy has come down and has been not exactly ideal when it got to the bottom. How do you marry those two communities in a way? How do they interact in a way that gets the most bang for the buck and is effective for the people we're trying to serve?
So it's a really, really important question, right, about how we actually turn, well thought through policy into effective practice on the ground. So first, I'll give you a really boring answer, right? I think boring answers are always good to get out there, because we find how common they are, right? So the really boring answer that people always offer when you think about, how come this great policy isn't actually being implemented on the ground? Or how come the people who are creating policy don't understand what's actually happening on the ground? And it's always presented as an information problem. Right? So the suggestion is always, well, only if the people who are creating policy, if they just really understood all of everything that was happening on the ground, then they would create different policies, right? And there's this suggestion that somehow there's an information disconnect there. And sometimes that can happen. Sometimes it's true that there's an information disconnect between the people who are creating policy and the people who are implementing the practice on the ground. Actually, I think that there are a lot of other things that usually go wrong in that translation from policy to practice. One of them is that a lot of times people who are creating policy at any level, it could be mid-operational level, strategic level, don't have a clearly articulated view of what success is. And that clearly articulated view of what success is not actually shared all the way down. And sometimes they don't know what success is because they're not sure themselves. They haven't actually figured out what they're trying to accomplish. And then what ends up happening on the ground is that you get a mess. Right? And you have people moving in all of these different directions because from the leadership, there's no really clear sense for where you actually need to go. Second thing that can happen in that divergence between policy and practice is that you actually have a lot of interests, and this is true in a military situation, it's true in humanitarian work, it's true in any number of environments, a number of interests that are involved in the actual practice that may not accord with what's set out by policymakers. So I'll give you a really specific example. We know in almost every international humanitarian situation that it's almost always better for children in desperate situations to stay with their parents and with their caretakers. And yet we find time and time again in all of these different emergencies that children end up being isolated from their caretakers, and they're put in orphanages or they're put in unaccompanied children's centers. And you ask yourself, well, why does that happen? Well, part of why it happens is because it's much easier, if you're actually controlling children in a center, it's much easier to bring the media, to actually show them the programming that you're doing as a nonprofit organization versus working with a bunch of distributed families throughout a refugee camp. It's much easier to do fundraising when you have everyone collected together. It's much easier if you have a new programmatic idea that you want to implement and you have a settled population there in an unaccompanied children's center. It's much easier to try that new programming out. So there are a lot of reasons that, because of fundraising interests, the interests of volunteers, the interests of media, that actually drive practice on the ground in a way that can actually help it that means that it diverges from policy. And then the final thing that I think is really important for all of us who are in this room to think about is that there's a really important difference between knowing that and knowing how. And if you were going to take a philosophical view of this, Aristotle talks about two different kinds of wisdom, right? And he talks about Sophia and he talks about phronesis. And Sophia is a knowledge of systems, right? So if you think about your knowledge of biology or astronomy or physics, it's a knowledge of systems, right? Phronesis is a practical wisdom that involves knowing how to get things done while at the same time knowing what is worth doing. And a lot of times at a policy level, you have people who have a tremendous education in knowing that. And they've studied systems, and they've studied history, and they've studied practice, but they may not have had actual understanding of how to get things done on the ground. Right? One of the things that you recognize in a refugee camp or working with street children in Bolivia, that one of the impediments to actually implementing an education policy might be that someone's parent is an alcoholic. Right? That's actually the really important barrier to their education, and you know that because you're actually on the ground. Whatever policy is set out around that has to face those practical barriers that people are facing who are involved in the how, who are involved in the implementation. And one of the things that can happen is that sometimes when we know that, we set out policies in such a way and create restrictions and barriers that don't enable the people who are actually doing the how to do that, to actually implement their practices effectively, right? So one of the things that you found that I write about in the book was around force protection in the U.S. military, right? So there's this policy, you want to keep everybody, force protection, protect your troops, protect your troops. What that leads to for us in Kenya was a bunch of guys in Land Rovers with sunglasses on, wearing, M4s in our laps, zipping through these villages, right? High speed. And that was great for force protection because it meant that we weren't going to get ambushed. It meant nobody was going to shoot at us, right? And in the immediate term, it kept us safer. What it also did is it upset all of the villagers around us because we'd go flying through these villages where they had young kids. And when you kind of have that divergence between people who are thinking about systems and people who are thinking about the practical reality of how things need to get done, that's also where you can get a lot of the disconnects between policy and practice, which is why it's so important, I think, to have policymakers who have that really tough, calloused hands, hard work experience of doing things on the ground so that can inform the way that they actually create policy.
Thank you.
Sure.
Question regarding leadership.
Yes.
You have kind of vast experience at the tactical level and strategic. It's been remarked that most of our world's and nation's citizens that are the most successful, they have resilience and strength of character as probably their core asset as opposed to other things. So as well as that strength of character and that resilience comes through failure. It comes through trial and error, by experiencing things that you don't often succeed at, dusting yourself off and getting back up. As someone who appears to have succeeded at everything he's tried, what failures have you gone through that have developed your resilience and your strength of character?
So there's a tremendous string of failures, and we can talk about them all afternoon. I'll give you just a few. So the first day that I walked into a boxing gym in Durham, North Carolina, I had no idea what I was doing. And I walked in and I went to a corner and I set my stuff down and I started doing some push-ups and I started doing some sit-ups. I had no idea how to train myself as a boxer. And this guy walks over to me and he says, "Hey man, you want to spar?" And I didn't have to think about that for long. And I said, "No." and then he says to me, "Hey man, how are you going to learn how to box if you don't spar?" And I had no answer for him, so I walked into the equipment closet and I put on a headgear and we got into the ring and he beat me up, right? And it wasn't a vicious beating, which would have been bad but might have even been acceptable. It was actually kind of one of those comic, pathetic beatings. Like, I'm going to let you stay here and I'm going to move around and I'm going to smile at you while I'm hitting you, and I'm just going to really reinforce this notion that you don't know what you're doing here and that you don't deserve to be here and that this isn't your place. I remember as I was driving home that night, I was driving back to the campus, and I was just thinking to myself, like, what am I doing? Right? What am I doing? And I knew, there were all of the reasons why I knew intellectually that I wanted to box and I wanted to test myself in this way. But what I took from that was that I needed to go back, and I did. And I went back the next day, and I found myself a place in the gym, and I started to work out again. And when the guy came back up again and he said, "Hey man, you want to spar?" I said to him, I said, "Yes." I said, "I do when I'm ready." And what I ended up finding at Duke, especially in the boxing gym, was that it was impossible for me to train myself. It was impossible for me to train myself through that failure, and it was possible for me to train myself through that pain. And what I needed to have was I needed to have the right kinds of friends and mentors. And I was very fortunate to ultimately find my boxing coach, Earl Blair, and my training partner, Derek Humphrey, who was a professional fighter, who actually helped me to actually, become a decent amateur boxer. I was never great, but I became a decent amateur boxer, and it was those friends who helped me through that period. And I've had so many different failures in my life, but when I look back on all of them, one of the things that I am able to see at every place was that as I was going through those moments of pain and fear and confusion and chaos, that often what I had with me was I had the right friend. Right? And I had friends who were there who cared enough about me that they were willing to help to push me through pain. Right? And a lot of times when we think about our friends, we think about people who we turn to for comfort. Right? When we're in a tough spot. And actually what these friends did for me in all of these situations was that they cared enough about me that they were actually willing to push me through pain. And it's one of the lessons that we use today in the work that we're doing with wounded and disabled veterans. What we find is that, of course, when they are having to physically rehabilitate, emotionally rehabilitate, they often have social problems that are happening in their lives, and they've got family problems and difficulties, and there's often a lot of failure as they're moving towards this idea of rebuilding purpose in their life. And what I know is that if we really care about them, and we really care about them getting to this place where they can serve as a citizen leader again, we have to be willing to push them through that pain. Because a lot of times what the culture will do is the culture will say, "Oh, you were hurt, you were injured, you lost a limb, you've got post-traumatic stress disorder. Hey, we're going to send you some free baseball tickets. We're going to send you free movie tickets. We're going to send you a gift basket. We're going to send you a blanket." And we're trying to give them all of these things as if that's going to make up for this sense of purpose that they've lost. And so I think for me, when I think about all of the failures that I've experienced in my life, I've been so fortunate to have the right kinds of people who pushed me. I'll give you just one more, small example on that. I remember one of my great philosophy professors at Duke was a guy named Alistair McIntyre. Great professor. And I remember I turned in a paper on Kant or something, and he gave us a very simple assignment, and the assignment was to write Kant's argument. And the idea was you were supposed to, well, it might be that simple, but anyway, but the idea was you were supposed to write down exactly what Kant said. And I started out by writing, Immanuel Kant was born in Connemara, all right, and he gave me the paper back, and there was just a giant X through like the first 4 paragraphs, and he said, "This is not what I asked for." And what he said was, you need to learn how to actually understand someone else's argument before you start adding your own commentary. And if you don't do that, you'll never actually be able to have your own thoughts. You have to be able to digest what somebody else is thinking. And again, it was a professor who, at that moment, you get those giant X's on your paper, and you start to think, "Oh man, I thought this right." But this was somebody who actually cared enough about the discipline and cared enough about me and all of his students that he was actually willing to put us in pain and to put us in discomfort to make us learn.
As a follow-up kind of to that, regarding your experience in DUDS and basic water demolition and SEAL training, you started off with 200, already elite. I would say if you're going to undergo that training, you always have to be probably an athlete, best of the best. Now, of that 200, only 20 graduated.
Yes.
And in your book, you talk about certain attributes and characteristics Of that group of your 19 brothers that graduated with you,
Yes.
Could you elaborate a little bit about what it took to stay together through that grueling and rigorous training?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll tell you a little bit about my own hardest moment, because I think everybody had a really, really difficult moment at some point in BUD/S, and I think what I learned in my hardest moment was something that was learned universally. So my hardest moment in BUD/S came during the pinnacle of the training. It came during a week that's called Hell Week. And Hell Week is universally considered to be the hardest week of the hardest military training in the world. And in the course of Hell Week, the average class sleeps for a total of 2 to 5 hours over the course of the entire week. And during Hell Week, they have you doing physical training on the beach with logs that weigh several hundred pounds. And you're doing 2-mile ocean swims and 4-mile runs in soft sand on the beach. And you're running the obstacle course. Everybody is pushed past their physical, mental, and emotional limits. And for our class, we'd been going for about 3 days. We'd been up for 72 hours, and we got to a point where everyone was so exhausted that they would literally just fall asleep standing up and just fall over. And finally, we were supposed to have what was going to be the greatest moment of Hell Week, and I was looking forward to it. It was the first time we were allowed to go and sleep. And what happened was the different crews had to do a dip contest on these bars outside. And whichever crew won was able to run into the tent first to go to sleep. Well, my crew lost, and we ran into the tents last. And as we ran into the tents, as soon as we got in there, all of the other students were already passed out asleep. And I laid down, and with every beat of my heart, I could feel my right foot pulsing, because the last time I'd been through medical, they'd wrapped my foot really tightly. So I got up, I took my boot off, I ripped the bandage off, threw it on the ground, tied the boot back up, laid back down, and still I couldn't fall asleep. And after a week of being freezing cold, there's now this beam of sunlight that's coming through the tent, and it's hitting my cot and the cots of a couple guys around me. It's now oppressively hot. And I started to panic a little bit. And I started to think, what's going to happen to me if I can't sleep? I only get 2 to 5 hours of sleep over the course of this whole week. What's going to happen to me if I can't sleep? And I knew that I was actually going a little bit crazy at the time, because the thought actually ran through my mind. I actually thought to myself, maybe if I can't sleep, maybe they'll let me take a nap, right? and so I'm there, and what started to happen was I started to get really fearful, and then I started to feel a lot of self-pity. And I started to think, you know what? It's not fair that my team ran into the tent. It's not fair that they wrapped my foot wrong the last time I went through medical. It's not fair that I have the worst cotton. So I started to think, I started to get fearful and started to feel self-pity. And I got up and I walked out of the tent, and I went over to a faucet that was about shoulder height. And I put my head under the faucet, and I washed the water over my head. And then just kind of cleared my head. And then as I was walking back to the tent, I just said to myself, I said, it's not about me. I said, this test isn't about me. The test is about my ability to be of service to the people who were asleep in that tent. The minute that I took my focus off of myself, the minute that I stopped thinking about my own pain and my own self-pity, then I walked into the tent and I fell asleep right away. And I knew then that I passed through my hardest moment. One of the things that I noticed in BUD/S, and this was true, I'll also say, later I realized that that was the only time in all of Hell Week that I was alone. At every other moment as I was going through the training, I was a leader. I was in charge of my boat crew. I was in charge of my class. And so no matter how much pain I was in, no matter how much difficulty it was for me, I knew that whatever was happening, I had to take care of the people around me. And then when I allowed myself to start thinking about myself and my own pain and my own fear, that's when I started to get weak. And what I noticed with all of these athletes who went through the training, and you're right, I mean, there were high school track stars, Division I college football players, international quality water polo players, great athletes, but what would happen is everybody got pushed past the envelope of their talent. And what would start to happen is some people would focus on themselves then. And once they were in pain, they were happy to be helpful when they were feeling good. They were happy to be helpful to others when they were in the front of the run. But as soon as they were in pain and they were in a moment of difficulty, then they started to collapse into themselves. And that's when they started to get weak. There were a lot of moments in the training when we were running down the beach. I can remember carrying this log that weighed several hundred pounds, when I thought to myself, if I were alone right now, I don't think I'd make it. But there's somebody to my left who's counting on me, there's somebody to my right who's counting on me. And I believe that the reason that people made it through the training was that, and they come from all these different backgrounds, all these different ideas, was that no matter what happened, in their own moment of physical pain and difficulty and challenge, they were able to think about other people. And I think that was one of the essential traits that actually kept people going and kept them through the training. The other thing I'll mention that I think was a trait that I was not expecting was that actually the people who made it through the training ended up having a pretty good sense of humor. And I think you have to, because actually having a good sense of humor, first of all, it helps you keep everything in perspective. And it's a mechanism when things are rough, and it's so miserable that you've got to find a way to have fun. So that was the other thing, was that a lot of the people who made it, not everybody, not universally, but a lot of people who made it through, they had a really good sense of humor.
All right, this time is flying right now. I'm gonna ask one more question. I'd like to bring it back to the mission continues.
Yes.
And then we're gonna turn it over to the audience. So think about some questions that you might have, and then we'll go and we'll give you the last 5 minutes after audience questions to kind of wrap it up.
Okay.
So there are a lot of different service organizations that are doing millions of hours of community service.
Yes.
Here in the States and abroad. Whether it's from the Mission Continues, the 6th branch, to international like AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, Peace Corps,
yes.
AmeriCorps domestically, and all of them have a significant impact locally and regionally. How do you, and this is, you're dedicating yourself to this now, so I know that you've got a good answer for this.
We'll see. Yes.
Is some people, sometimes there is the criticism of an event like, let's go out and pick up trash, or let's go mentor, 3rd graders in the inner city on a Sunday morning, and there is kind of the question about, all right, where do we take that? And we all look at that and say that is awesome, that is great, and it feels good, and there's a whole lot of goodness going on there. How do you take that and make it into a bigger systemic change? And especially with the Mission Continues, I know there's a fellowship program with the Mission Continues where you are 100% enabling veterans to come home and dedicate completely to service.
Yes.
To make it on a timeline longer. On scale and impact and significance, yeah. How do you make that bigger?
So I'll just kind of walk through an answer. I'm not sure that I actually have this fully thought through, but I remember actually when I went to work with I worked with Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity for a little bit in Varanasi, India, and then in Calcutta. And if any of you have been there, or they are often working in these homes for the destitute and dying. And I was working primarily in this home in Varanasi, India, but then I went to the home Kalighat, which is one of the original homes in Calcutta. And when I was in Kalighat, I was there, and I had an incredible experience. I got to see Mother Teresa. It was a fantastic experience. But I also remember there was a moment where there were all of these volunteers who were stepping off of this bus, who were coming into the home to work. And they were all washing blankets. They're hand washing all of these blankets. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I know for sure that there are donors who would buy some washing machines, right? And I was thinking to myself, like, why are they doing this? This seems so inefficient. It just doesn't quite make sense to me that they'd have everybody out here washing these blankets, because it'd be so much more efficient to throw them in the wash. Fewer people doing it, you get the blankets out cleaner. In my mind, thinking about systems and efficiency, right, you're starting to think like, hey, this would make so much more sense to do it in these different ways. And I left India actually thinking that same way. And it was actually only later, when I look back on the experience, that I realized that the home was there for the destitute and dying. But it was also a place where people were coming to actually transform themselves through service. And that actually, I mean, yes, the sisters had taken this vow of poverty, which was, you know, technically the reason why they didn't have washing machines there. But it was also, in practice, the fact was all of these people now were able to come and have this experience of doing something with their hands that was actually valuable to people who needed a clean blanket. And I think that one of the things that we've learned at the Mission Continues is that we're actually going to wounded and disabled veterans. And we're asking them to find a way to continue to serve. And we're saying to them, you know, there's an organization here called Big Brothers Big Sisters, and we need you to become a big sister. And there's an organization here and a group of kids who needs a youth hockey coach, and a group of kids who's going to need a martial arts instructor. And there's Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and they need your service. And there might sometimes be more, you know, efficient ways to do service projects, but actually what you want to do is actually provide that experience of serving others to people. And when our veterans come out, when we bring people together to do these service projects with veterans, what ends up happening is that people start an internal process of transformation. And that through their actions, they might come for any number of different reasons, but through the act of actually being of service, and through the act of being compassionate, through the act of being courageous, they actually start to become more compassionate, more courageous. And so I think that actually what you're doing with a lot of these service projects is that you're helping people to actually shape their character. Right? And for our veterans, when they go and they start this service work, right, if we said to them, you need to do this for yourself, because it's going to be good for you, they'd blow us off. They got plenty of people who are telling them, you know, what they need to do for themselves. But in fact, when we go to them and we say that you're needed here, then what happens is they respond to that call for service. And I think what we need to do as a country is to connect to people and let them know that they are needed. Because there are tremendous needs, and yet a lot of times we're just not asking. One of the things that we found when we did this survey of veterans is that they came back and they said that they felt like they did have something to offer, but no one was asking them to continue to serve in their community. So, you know, in the same way that in the home and for Mother Teresa, what they recognized was that by creating these opportunities for service, they were actually shaping the characters of the people who were serving. What we need to do is to go to everyone and find ways to ask them to be of service. And if we can do that from a leadership perspective, then we actually create opportunities for them to grow into their own strength.
So more of a process than an end goal.
Yeah, and I think that what ends up happening is once people start to serve, once you start to build this habit of service, then you find that they actually become service oriented. The single largest indicator for whether or not young people, the single largest indicator for whether or not post-college graduates are involved in community service is whether or not they did it as kids. And so it's like everything else. If you want to build this culture, you have to get people involved in these activities and build that habit. We're trying to do that for veterans who are coming back, who have all these abilities. We're trying to build those habits of post-military service in a civilian context.
With that, I think we'll turn it over to audience questions. And we've got a microphone here in the middle. Feel free to get up and go to the microphone. I think we're going to start off with Nick here, who interned for the Mission Continues in 2010.
Yes.
So on behalf of everyone, thank you very much for sharing your afternoon, your experiences and insights with us.
Pleasure.
So I'm Nick, and I'm in the Navy as well. And so my question to you is about talent retention in the military. The mission continues, and here at HKS, I've been very impressed by the talents and commitment to service of many military veterans. But what I find is many of them are getting out. And so my question to you is, can you share a little bit more about your experience making that decision to leave active duty?
Sure.
And maybe what, a little insight on maybe what the military could do to better retain its best leaders?
Yeah, great question. So for me, when I came back from that deployment in Iraq and I saw what was happening with with not just my friends, but with the Marines who I had visited at Bethesda Naval Hospital, I just knew that this was the place where I was needed. I felt like because of my military service, because of the work that I had done studying and working with international humanitarian organizations overseas, because there weren't other organizations in the space that were actually challenging veterans or just giving them things to them, I knew that this was an important place for me. And I made the decision to stay in the reserves. I'm still in the reserves and happy to do that. But I knew that this was a place, you know, for me to continue to serve. And I don't know that it was any more complicated than just knowing that, like, the time had come in my life when this was the way for me to change my path in service. I think that one of the things that we can do more generally in the U.S. military is that right now we have kind of one train track career path that you can be on, and you can kind of jump into the military and you can stay in and you can do your 20 plus years and then you can retire, or you can jump in, you can do some time on active duty, and then you can stay in the reserves as you go forward. But we don't have a system that provides the kind of flexibility so that people can step out and really actually step outside of the military. We have a wonderful example here, Renee, right, who's actually here and is going to do this study at the Kennedy School and then is going to go back to West Point. But there come times in people's lives when they might have gotten married, or they've had a couple of kids, or they would decide that they want to start a business. And there's just a time for them when they want to step outside of that military life and pursue another track, and there's often not a way for them to step back into the military. In the same way, we often, for incredibly talented people who might be really capable leaders in the private sector, in journalism, and universities, there's often not a way for them to insert themselves into the military process other than going to boot camp or going to officer candidate school for us to kind of capture that talent. And I think that there's probably ways for the military to think more creatively about how you can actually capture some of that talent and then bring it in to use it effectively. One of the best places where we do that in the military is actually in the medical service. Right? So medical service, you have a lot of civilian docs who are absolutely fantastic, and they can do an immediate kind of cross-transfer in to the U.S. military, and they're able to use their talents and to serve there. But outside of the medical service, we have trouble a lot of times taking really talented strategic planners, thoughtful people, cultural experts, and actually bringing them in a way so that we can make use of their talents. And I think we could do a better job there.
Thanks.
You're welcome, Nick. Yeah. You're welcome. Hey, Cameron. Yes. Yes.
The question for you is, what can we do as veterans to help civilians help us? Put it in the hand. Come home from tours, people ask questions like, how many people did you kill?
Yes.
What was it like? How do we help our families and friends better somebody?
Yeah, fantastic question, Cameron. I think, oh, sure. Is that good? Is that good? Yeah. Fantastic question, Cameron. I think that for a lot of times when veterans come home, they are confronted by a society that has no appreciation for their experience. They don't really know what they have lived through. And one of the things that I think that we have to do are create opportunities for better veteran-civilian dialogue. We're actually, because everyone is curious, they want to know, what was it like when you were serving in Afghanistan? What was it like when you were serving in Sometimes it's just not the right time, it's not the right place for an individual to have that conversation. Thank you. Should I turn this back? So everybody can hear you. Is it everybody hear you?
We can hear you fine.
Yeah, all right, great. So I think one of the things that we have to do is create those opportunities for actual outreach to families and to friends, so that when people come home, there's a place for families and for friends to go to hear about the experience in general. You might not need to turn to a particular person and ask them about their experience the minute that they stepped off of the plane, right? Which is what happens to a lot of people. And you're still trying to think about how to process that. The other thing that I think can be helpful is that a lot of times people who are really caring and know that veterans have lived through great hardship, they want to come to them and they want to baby them, right? And they want to do this because they're thoughtful and they're caring and they want to take care of people when they've come home. But especially for people who have suffered, and they might have suffered physically or they might have suffered post-traumatic stress disorder, a lot of times actually that outreach, whether it's giving people gift baskets or blankets or free movie tickets or free rental cars, it actually feels to the veteran like you think I'm a charity case. Like I came home and now I'm hurt and now all I'm good for is and I'm giving these things. I think that as veterans, our responsibility in this is to find ways, and this is obviously what we do at the Mission Community, find ways to come back and show people how that military service is of value back at home. And that might be going out and becoming a youth soccer coach. That might be coming out and getting involved in education and being able to take some of that experience that you've had and show people how you can use it in order to be of service back here at home. And I think that sets the right message, right? And the veteran is saying, I'm going to come back, I'm going to use this experience to serve. And if we can reach out to civilians more generally, family and friends, when we first come home, tell them about that experience and give them some guidance on how to actually speak to veterans, I think that can go a long way.
We've got about 8 minutes, so sure. If we could, we'd like to get some more questions from the audience. 8 minutes until you close up, and we'll try to keep the answers a little bit brief.
Yeah, for sure.
Get some more questions.
Yeah. Sure. Hi, Eric. My name is Dan. I'm an Army vet. Like Dan here as well. And like Dan, I sought my graduate school experience after leaving the military, after separating from the military. And your experience was one that has always struck me as very unique, and it's very much the opposite. So I'm wondering if you have certainly have had time to reflect, but what reflections you've had on how your graduate school experience influenced your military experience, and if it's something that you could see yourself still having done without having gone to grad school, or if it enriched it, took away from it, or what you took away from that.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'll say is that my other good friend here is a Navy veteran is named Dan. So I don't know what you guys have going on with like the Dan. But anyway, you know, so a couple of things. First of all, in my own experience, one of the things that happened was by the time I joined the military, I was 26. And it doesn't sound for all of us who are in this room like you're that old, but actually to a kid who's 19 when you're 26, I mean, you may as well be their dad. I mean, it's a huge gulf there. And so I actually, you know, joined a little bit older. And one of the things that actually did for me also was that I had a little more life experience. I had a little more maturity. You know when you're 26 years old that nothing that's painful lasts forever, right? And you know when you're 26 years old that if you just kind of keep focused on doing the right things, you might work through some pain, but everything's not a crisis when you're 20, in the way that it is when you're 19, 20, and this is the first major thing that you've ever really been tested with in your life. So that was helpful to me. And then the other thing was that I think I benefited tremendously from the perspectives that I gained in graduate school, both in the classroom and in the classroom with what I learned academically and with the people who I was with. I was with a wonderful international cadre of students, and they taught me a lot in the classroom. And then the experience that I had doing service work overseas really informed the way that I ended up approaching my deployments, so that when I was in a place like Kenya, for example, I wasn't thinking about it just as a military officer. I'd actually been there before as a student, and I was thinking and doing service work, and it lent a much different and helpful perspective when I was a military officer.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for your time.
Well,
I think you make a really compelling case for a continuance of service and having challenging vets to do that. I think a lot of vets, though, are also concerned about work and employment and jobs and homes. Some of them are obviously homelessness rates among veterans is far beyond the national proportions. So I wonder, in addition to getting them involved in their communities, what thoughts you have on getting them jobs and getting them back to work?
Absolutely. So for us, a successful fellowship is one where the fellow leaves and they go on to full-time employment full-time education, some combination of the two, and what we call an ongoing role in service. So they're continuing to serve in their community. They're not just getting a job, but they're continuing to serve. That's success for us. And we actually think of, the fellowship is only 7 months. We think of the fellowship as a springboard back into your life as a citizen leader. And we've actually had tremendous success with our fellows going through this project. And what happens is when they serve, they reconnect to their sense of purpose. When they begin to serve again, they see that they do have a value in a civilian context, and they decide, you know what, I want to become a licensed physical therapist. I want to become a pediatric nurse. I want to start my own business. I want to, right? And so it's that period in service where it actually opens up these prospects. But you're exactly right. For us, the success there is not for them to be a Mission Continues Fellow for the rest of their life. The success is for them to actually become a citizen leader, who's fully employed, fully capable, who's actually at work again in the world. And I think that, again, for a lot of veterans, you're exactly right. There's this concern about the house, and there's a concern about what's right in front of them with the job, and there's this concern about what's happening with their family. There are all these concerns that are right in front of them. And when you're hit by, and this is just a general rule that's true about life, when you're hit by all of these different obstacles at once, it can really wear you down. When you have a direction and you're working through those obstacles, then you actually, that's how resilience builds, right? Is when you actually have a purpose and you have a direction. What we're doing at the Mission Continues is we're not taking away all of those obstacles, but we're providing a sense of direction through them and a path to success through them. And our fellows are able to see that the fellows before them, you know, somebody who lost their eyesight sees somebody else who lost their eyesight who's now fully employed. And they see somebody else who came back with post-traumatic stress disorder who's now going back to school. And they see these models, they see a direction for themselves through that so that they do get to a place where they are fully employed and they're able to deal with those, all of those obstacles which are going to continue to come. Yeah, please.
Thank you again for sharing.
You're welcome.
I'd like to know what were your experiences when you make transitions? Because you have quite a varied experience. And sometimes if you become a humanitarian, and I mean, it's a type of difficulty to be a soldier, but sometimes if you're a humanitarian, there are people, when they come to you, who don't have a gun. So you have to use a different set of skills. You may have the character and qualities, but you don't have the skills. So what were your experiences in the beginning of these transitions? And I'm asking this because many people here who are very successful are thinking to make radical transitions. And the beginning for them is maybe the most challenging part. If they start, probably they will be as successful. But what was that defining moment when you had to build immediately?
Yes. You're very welcome. And I think actually, I mean, that's a great question for us all to know, because first let me start with a really general thought. I would say, generally speaking, and I don't know each one of you personally. I know many of you who are in this room, but I don't know each one of you personally. But I would say that for the people who are at this place, who are in this room right now, if you think about what the greatest risk is to you of making this transition from success to significance, I would suggest that the greatest risk is that you won't take the risk. Okay? The greatest risk is that you won't take the risk, because you've built up. What ends up happening to a lot of people is they get successful in a particular field, they get successful in a particular place, and then that can be very comforting, and you feel solid and you feel successful in that particular environment, and you don't want to step outside of it. I was, fortunate in all of my transitions to recognize that I was not going to meet with success. And I think, so all of those transitions were difficult transitions. When I first joined the U.S. military, I went from being at Oxford. I was doing my dissertation defense. They call it a viva. And in the viva, there's the Oxford dons, and they actually do wear these, black gowns with the little bow ties. And the question that I was asked, one of the questions I was asked in my defense was, Mr. Greitens, what is your theory of ideas, right? And they wanted to know my theory of ideas and what I thought about. And then I got to the U.S. military, and I had a drill instructor who was standing over me, who was yelling at me, saying, you don't even know how to tie your shoes. How are you going to be able to ride? Because I tied my shoes the wrong way. I didn't tie them in the Navy way, I was supposed to tie them. And there's this sense like, wow, I just left this place where I was really successful. And I could have kept doing all these things. And now I'm in this place where people don't even think that I can tie my shoes. And in the same way, when I think about my life, other transitions, when I came back from Iraq, I was a successful Navy SEAL and I was doing well there. And then I had this idea that I wanted to start this thing called The Mission Continues. And actually, I didn't even know it was going to be called The Mission Continues, and I had a really bad idea that I'd call it the Center for Citizen Leadership, which is a terrible name. Because I couldn't citizen-centered something, it didn't work. But what ended up happening, when I came back was, I was living on an air mattress at home with an idea that I wanted to get this organization off the ground. And everybody who I went to ask for help told me about what other people were doing. And nobody wanted to give me funding. I didn't have a website. I didn't have a program. I didn't have a plan. But what I decided I would do right at the beginning was that I would focus on changing just one life. And I knew that if I could change just one life in our program, that other people would see the value of it and they would start to come together. All of that, I just offer as an example. In my life, those transitions were hard. And it's easy to look back now, and The Mission Continues as a successful, growing, dynamic nonprofit organization. There were months where I really doubted whether or not this thing was actually going to get off the ground. And so I think that the danger for all of us who are in a place like this is that you won't take the risk. I got some really good advice when I was young, and somebody said it's really important when you design your life that you always have a place in your life where you're a beginner at something. For me right now, it's doing Taekwondo. It's a martial art that I started, and I just think that it's really valuable for me to go every single day to a place where I don't know what I'm doing. And I have to learn from a master, and I have to learn from an instructor, and it gives you the confidence to be able to start new things and to make those transitions. And what I would encourage all of you to do, if I can give unsolicited advice at this point, the thing that's actually worked for me has been taking those sensible, thoughtful risks. Because at the end of the day, every single person who's in this room is going to be fine. You really are going to be fine. And you might doubt yourself for a while, and you might not feel like you're quite as successful as your friends, right? But if you actually take that risk and you invest in yourself and you're willing to bet on yourself, I think that's the best thing that you can possibly do.
I think that is an awesome point to close out. So I'd like to please join me. Thank you, Eric.
And he got this thunderous applause. The whole stadium stood, it was a sold-out game. And I think it demonstrates the sentiments of this country towards so many young heroes who've come back from serving the country in military uniform and are increasingly providing role models here in the United States and overseas for citizen leadership and trying to get others engaged in leadership. Eric Greitens grew up in Missouri. He went to Duke, where I'm proud to see the Duke tie that he has on today, a Blue Devil looking tie. He was a philosophy major in college. He won both a Rhodes Scholarship, and it was a Marshall? Truman, and a Truman. It's a rare individual who wins both of those. Went off to Oxford, where he did two things. It's an interesting question which one was more notable. He got a PhD in international development, and he also won a number of boxing championships because he'd become an amateur boxer while he was at Duke, found it was a little cushy there, and had went off to these gyms in Durham where I grew up and worked out with these black boxers and who taught him how to box. But he went off to Oxford and did that, and he became a humanitarian. Working in far-flung places in the world like Rwanda and other places like that. And one might think that would have put him firmly on a path to be engaged in, as an academic perhaps, who is, might be here at the Carr Center, working on human rights. But instead, he decided to make a different life choice. In 2003, he signed up for the Navy SEALs. And those of you who know anything about the SEALs know just how tough a regime that is. We've all learned more about that with the demise of bin Laden. And while there, he had 4 deployments. He won a number of awards for his military service, including a Purple Heart. But as I understand this, as I remember the story, I may have some aspects of this wrong. While he was wounded, it was his men in uniform who were more grievously wounded. He came back and saw how their lives had been changed. Good afternoon. Thank you very, very much for coming. This is an event we've looked forward to here at the Kennedy School now for some time. And I think that in just a few moments you'll have ample reason to find out why. This has been such an anticipated day. This is an event that is co-sponsored by 3 organizations here. The HKS National Security Committee, what is that called? The Armed Forces Committee, is that what that's called? Okay, well, that's made up, the veterans make that up, and then the National Security Fellows, and then our own Center for Public Leadership. And I guess we provided the pizza. Did we do that, Donna? And also we were honored that our speaker was able to come. I had the pleasure, my wife and I, this summer, of going with our speaker and his new bride to the Boston Red Sox game where he was honored. It was Veteran of the Month. Was it Veteran of the Month? And and they asked him to come over and stand up on top of the Red Sox dugout in between innings so dramatically by their disablement. And so many of them were demoralized because they had joined the service with a sense that they were on a mission to serve the country. And that mission had been brought to a crashing end by what had happened to them in the field. And Eric then set out to see if he couldn't provide new hope for them and get them back on their feet. And he started an organization called The Mission Continues. And the whole notion behind The Mission Continues is, okay guys, you've been disabled in one way, but you're still able in other ways. It's really important for us to help you get back on your feet, find jobs where you can continue to serve your country. And he can tell more about that story. But the first call I got about Eric came from the president of the Goldman Sachs Foundation some months ago and said, I'd like to introduce you. You need to know about Eric Greitens. I said, I've heard about him. I know about him already, but tell me more. And she said, we have fallen in love with him at the Goldman Sachs Foundation. And the foundation has provided him $6 million for his startup. And he's now got, I think, 3 more years to spend out and to build this organization and to partner with other veterans organizations on behalf of veterans around the country. It's a stirring tale. It's a personal story as well as a story about the idealism of the country. And he captured it best, and I hope that you will have a chance. You know, we don't, under the rules, we don't sell books at Harvard. It's sort of a difficult thing to do, but we can urge you to go and get this book. But his book called The Heart and the Fist is, I think, and its subtitle is The Education of a Humanitarian, The Making of a Navy SEAL. And I just would urge you to read this. He sent it to me in a manuscript form, and I wrote among the endorsements, if you worry that America is no longer a home of heroes, come read this riveting tale of a young man's adventures as a boxer, a thinker, a warrior, and ultimately a humanitarian. He writes admiringly of the Greek notion of phronesis, practical wisdom. Quote, the ability to figure out what to do while at the same time knowing what is worth doing. Mr. Greitens has plenty of phronesis. So I want to turn this over, but just before